World War II was the biggest and deadliest war in the history of humanity. It started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland and lasted for 6 deadly years. It eventually ended in 1945 when the Allies defeated Germany, Italy, and Japan. The cost of human casualties was devastating. Estimates start from 35 million to 118 million deaths. That's an enormous amount of lives lost. It surely is the biggest war in history, but that didn't make the suffering and importance of the lives lost in smaller conflicts insignificant. The second worst casualty was from the Mongol invasion, followed by the Taiping Rebellion and the European colonization of the Americas. Having heard all those atrocities that we commit must have at least dimmed your light towards humankind. However, are we really that evil? Are we doomed to more warfare? Well, maybe not really, at least according to Rutger Bregman. In his book, Humankind: A Hopeful History, he argues that humans are decent at heart, and he proposes a more optimistic view of human beings. It argues that humans are fundamentally decent, and this kind of view would likely benefit everyone, since cynical expectations of others lead people to become cynical themselves. For example, if we believe we're lazy, there would be a lot of reasons to oppose poverty mitigation measures like basic income. So, if we believe that humans are inherently good, then it would result in a better world, right? Well, to see that, let's go back to the Second World War. During World War II, aerial bombardment was thought to be able to instill panic and chaos among the population, hence breaking their will. World leaders like Adolf Hitler, Stalin, and Churchill read The Crowd, a study of the popular mind by Gustav Le Bon. The book proposed that extreme hardship would make people uncivilized and selfish. However, the British found no mass panic after the German bombings of London. Despite that, the military still insisted on the belief that bombings would break people's will. They justified this belief by suggesting that the British citizens had a unique characteristic enabling them to handle the stress of the bombardment better. The Germans, however, lacked resilience, so they bombed them back. After the war, British psychiatrists visited German cities and found none of the expected traumatic cases. Instead, they found many people with an increased quality of mental health, and they became more altruistic in both nations. Churchill was blindly convinced that it was best to bomb civilians, only to recognize that they were wasting their ammunition, time, and lives on targets who would never break instead of on factories that would. When people believe the worst in others, they see the evil they expect to see. During Hurricane Katrina, town leaders reported cases of rapes and killings, but researchers found that the city was flooded with courage and charity. The only killings that happened were among police who were sent to stop the killings that never happened. Similar studies were found around the world by the Disaster Research Center in almost 700 case studies. They found no evidence of mass panic. Instead, they found acts of altruism between victims. It is the authority that acts selfishly, not citizens. The cynical view of the elite who disperse their view through the news ultimately obscured the mundane reality of human kindness. In 1954, Lord of the Flies was released by William Golding, depicting school children who were stranded on an island. Desperate, they quickly turned on one another out of selfishness. It implies that when push comes to shove, people will express their repressed inner demons as being instruments of their own destruction. Bregman, however, argued that it is a work of fiction and we have to treat it as such. To compare, he found a real-world example. Surprisingly, we found a very different image when humanity is freed from the shackles of civilization. In 1965, 6 Tongan boys were stranded on the island of Ata with no resources and adult supervision. To survive, the boys came up with rules to ensure cooperation. Tasks were given to accommodate respective strengths and weaknesses. When arguments happened, they would separate themselves to cool down and engage in good faith to resolve the matter. After 15 months stranded, they were finally rescued, and they were found with a vegetable garden, a badminton field, chicken coops, and a permanent fire. When one of the boys fell and broke his leg, the others urgently provided him with medical care. After the rescue, medical professionals were impressed with the general health of the boys, including the broken leg that had fully recovered. Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau had a different view of the world. Hobbes thought that civilization suppressed the bad in humanity and that we must put our souls in the hands of a single absolute sovereign. And you hear this time and time again from dictators, politicians, and generals. Rousseau, on the other hand, believed that civilization was a mistake and that agriculture, city, and state did not save us from chaos and anarchy, but subjugated and damned us. We humans as a species are relatively young, but we managed to spread across the globe, from the cold mountains to the driest desert, to the tropical climate, to the cold, unforgiving tundra. Why are we so successful? Some would credit our species' insatiable greed and selfishness no other animals can match, or so biologists like Richard Dawkins claims. Bregman, however, thinks otherwise. Machiavellian theory thinks that we can be successful if we are willing to be cutthroat in society. While this is somewhat true in civilized communities, it only explains the success of individuals in a social hierarchy, but not as a species. We cannot be successful if we turn on one another. If it is true, then chimpanzees should have been more successful, since they're better at the games of deceit. People want to trust and cooperate with others. We struggle with deceit. We have prominent whites in our eyes to see where they're directed. And we blush, letting people see our emotions, sometimes against our will. These traits wouldn't come if we were supposed to conceal our thoughts. Drawing conclusions from domestication research, Bregman suggests that humans possess the domestication syndrome. Since no other species has been known to domesticate us, there remains only one candidate, ourselves. Our bodies are much softer, more feminine, and more youthful than those of other humans like Neanderthals. The kindest people bred more among the early humans, not the cruel ones. We are Homo puppy, says Bregman. Brian Hare, a specialist in the study of canines, found that domesticated foxes were not merely social, but supremely intelligent. Scientists used to believe that domestication made animals less intelligent rather than more. On social intelligence tests, most children score 100 and most chimps and orangutans 0. Our ability to accumulate knowledge and disseminate it is what makes us able to pull ahead of our competitors. We share it with others because we get along. Other species, however, have to start from scratch. Since we are social creatures, some may assume that our pro-social behavior is an innate part of the human essence, but it doesn't explain the antisocial part of the essence. Oxytocin, known as the chemical of love, increases affection for ones we know, but it also increases hostility towards strangers. If this was correct, we would find archaeological evidence suggesting human violence, and we did. Some anthropological studies in the 20th century also reached the same conclusions in hunter-gatherer societies at the time. This might mean that humans have been forever violent at heart, and it continues to this day. What better example to take than warfare, since here, not only do we kill, but order to and paid to. However, Bregman raised an example that contradicts this notion. He said that during the Second World War, many professional soldiers refused to shoot or kill. Some of the soldiers used reloading as an excuse not to shoot. Anthropologists have also discovered that some anthropological studies contaminate their objects of research, like giving axes and machetes to their objects, like the Yanomamo tribe. The researcher, Napoleon Chagnon, was even banned from the tribe because the tribe found the contamination so undesirable. When studying nomadic cultures, anthropologists today found that nomads prefer to solve conflicts by talking them through or moving to the next valley. They are also social, so they eat, sing, and marry people from other groups. As a result, nomads usually meet around 1,000 people in their lifetime, with strangers getting included in the group peaceably. Anthropological studies almost always contaminate their subjects. Because of that, we also need to compare contemporary tribes to nomadic tribes that came before us, the prehistoric people. These people have very few possessions, but they did leave something for us to see: cave art. Here, they showed their ultimate deeds and desires, like cows, but they never felt the need to immortalize warfare, suggesting that it didn't exist, at least according to Bregman. There are also no signs of battles in the roughly 400 sites that are old enough to tell us about human pre-civilization. Violent deaths are recorded only after the domestication of horses, the advent of agriculture, and a permanent settlement. Violence has not been absent among our ancestors, and it's unlikely that we could have conquered the world as a pacifist. However, Christopher Bohm found that hunter-gatherer groups valued equality. If we value equality, then where does this violence and inequality come from? Well, it probably comes from greed. Bregman is clear that vanity and greed are not new phenomena, but cultural acceptance and systematic encouragement towards them are. When people were nomadic, they didn't inherit wealth and have private property. So Bregman says that aggressive personalities have fewer opportunities to reproduce. This age of equality ended after the Ice Age, when humans began establishing permanent settlements, and conveniently, this is when the evidence of the first wars appeared. Wars started very recently in the history of our species. Why? Because we have something to fight for, something to protect. Permanent settlements give us the need for inheritance and generational accumulation of wealth, and it needed protection. This justifies permanent leadership, and they use wars to secure their position at the top of society. Farming contributed substantially to our survival, but it also contributed to population growth and an increase in labor. One thing led to another, and the number of wild animals declined, and agriculture had to be practiced on land without fertile silt. At this point, we're trapped. Those who resisted did not survive. Towns turned to cities, then to provinces. The constant pressure of war forced us to scale up, and then this led to the final disaster that Rousseau wrote about, the birth of a state. In his book, Rutger Bregman takes a closer look at the famous Stanford Prison experiment by Philip Zimbardo and says it's not as shocking as we've been led to believe. He argues that the experiment depiction of people in authority turning into sadistic monsters is wrong and mostly a result of Zimbardo trying to make a name for himself. Bregman points out that Zimbardo gave the guards detailed instructions on how to be cruel and positioned himself as their leader, even though he later said it'll happen naturally. This goes against the rules of how experiments should be conducted, because the participants weren't supposed to know what the study was really about. Bregman says that the guards' behavior wasn't because they were born sadists, but because they thought it was expected of them for the experiment to work. And he mentions that many of the guards were actually reluctant to do what they were told. Only 1/3 of them were really mean to the prisoners. Also, it turns out that the participants stuck with the study because they were getting paid, not because they were having a blast. Bregman talks about a BBC attempt to redo the study with stricter rules, and it didn't go at all like the original. The guards and prisoners started sharing food and socializing and even formed a commune. This goes against the idea that people are naturally inclined to be nasty. Bregman suggests that when people are given a choice, they usually prefer friendship over conflict. Back in 1961, Stanley Milgram ran a famous experiment at Yale University. He wanted to see how far people would go in hurting others just because someone in charge told them to. As a disguise, they told the participants it was about testing memory and punishment. Turns out, 65% of the folks in the experiment were willing to crank up a 450-volt electric shock, even with a big danger sign saying it's not safe past 350 volts. But here's the catch. Lots of experts have poked holes in the study. First off, only about 56% of the participants even thought the shocks were real. The rest were not convinced their actions were causing any harm. And of those who did believe it, most only did it because they were told that their participation was crucial for science. Being bossed around or intimidated didn't matter as much. Bregman's take on this is that people are not just wired to obey authority blindly. Instead, they have a natural tendency to want to help out with worthwhile stuff, like advancing scientific knowledge. This challenges the old idea that we're all just followers when someone in charge says so. Milgram and Zimbardo wanted to test whether ordinary people can do evil. Their experiments showed that people can do horrible things in a toxic environment. However, subsequent research showed that Milgram and Zimbardo failed to provide evidence for their hypothesis. In fact, during both experiments, many refused to follow orders. It means we do have free will, and that we don't need to be pawns in others' games. Bregman's overwhelmingly positive view of humanity unsurprisingly faced criticism and opposition. Some accused Bregman of cherry-picking the evidence, being overly simplistic, and making wild accusations about our ancestry. He failed to explain the actions of the Holocaust, especially those of the Nazi leaders. His references to sources are careless and incomplete. While it's true that clear evidence of violence in a hunter-gatherer society is relatively absent, that doesn't mean that violence did not exist. A lot of his writing is very black and white, and it feels like he's denying the darker part of being human. But it's happening right now in the Middle East. People are essentially killing each other. While you could say that they are protecting their state, or that the common people are brainwashed into thinking that the other party is evil, then why are the top officials orchestrating all the atrocities that are happening? Why do they go out of their way to do such acts of evil without being asked to? Stopping food from coming, bombing medicinal supplies, and starving the entire population. Why do some countries not vote for a ceasefire? If all humans want to do good and prefer to cooperate rather than fight, then why does this happen? What about people who take advantage of a desperate situation? Those in cartels? What about racism? What about slavery? What about tribal fighting before agriculture? Humans kill other humans as long as they are humans. Bregman failed to take into account that humans are not simplistic and life is complex. It's nice to focus on the positive side of human character instead of seeing us as bloodthirsty monsters. But it's not nice to ignore our atrocities and all the destruction we made. It is better to face our faults than simply ignore them, because if we ignore them, then who will take responsibility? Bregman believes that we do acts of evil partly because we believe ourselves to be evil, and that is why it's important to believe that we are good, to do good, and encourage others the same. While I do agree with that, I also believe that we have to acknowledge that we are vile, evil, and despicable, because then we can understand ourselves better and work to improve ourselves for a better human condition. So, the debate about human nature, the Hobbes versus Rousseau views, is actually a mix of both. Violence has declined in the last few centuries. This can be credited to the centralized societal control in the form of the state, which was initially religious and authoritarian, but then democratic in many countries. The norm of self-control is also increasing in modern societies. Social media helps to see the point of view of other people, and it increases the availability of information, both high and low quality. All in all, people who do bad things don't believe they are evil and try to rationalize evil acts. However, our evolution, both biological and cultural, has made us more cooperative, even compassionate. Being a victim of evil acts is devastating and demoralizing, and telling victims that evil is not as common does nothing to reduce their trauma. But it might help to know that the world is not as evil as some might think, that most people are not inherently evil, and that the world is becoming less violent. Thank you.